Injury report came out. We've got some new news on the team. We're going to break it all down right after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? I'm back here with another video, and we've got a special collaboration. I'm back with Jack here. Jack, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing, Rohan?
It's good. I mean, 49ers off to a better start after, a little bit of a sluggish start offensively. 30 points last week offensively. Obviously, the 7 with Emmanuel Mosley. Huge win, and now you're facing off against the Atlanta Falcons here this week. But there's a good amount of news that are coming on. We're going to break it all down to you. But before we start, just got to give a quick shout out. Make sure you subscribe to both channels. And also, for all your headers and everything, make sure you hit Roscoe's, obviously, on Twitter. All that stuff's in the description. Be sure to subscribe to both of our channels and hit them up if you need any Twitter headers. But, Jack, talking about the 49ers, injury report came out. That's kind of the bit of the headline, right? Jason Verrett, let's start with him. The news came out today that he had a bit of a setback, and they're going to reevaluate him next week, essentially ensuring that he will not play this weekend or be activated from the PUP list. What are you anticipating at cornerback, and does that news scare you in a bit?
It would be it's a little scary just because if there's a little bit of flare up in that knee, that could be something that makes this a situation. I think they only have one more week in order to elevate him to the active roster. So they're kind of getting towards the end of the practice window, I believe. I'd have to go back and double check on the rules on that, but I think they're getting towards the end of it. It always kind of made more sense for Verrett to make his return at Levi's on the grass instead of, on the road, in the dome or on AstroTurf, given his past history. So I would say that I'm mildly concerned about his availability for the remainder of the year and his ability to make a full comeback from this.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope these, the little setbacks don't continue to happen, right? Those are the big things when you talk about Jason Verrett. Obviously, unfortunately, in his career, it's been setback after setback. And I think it is smart in a way to hold him out. Don't play him on turf in his first game back after, obviously, he suffered his injury, I believe, on turf last year against Detroit. Get him back at home and get him an extra week, pretty much. Reevaluate him on Wednesday, see if he can go next week. And Kyle Shanahan said it, I think, in a good way. Jason Verrett, he put confidence in Verrett. He's our starter on the outside when he comes back healthy. But the point is, we want him to be 100% when he comes back. Doesn't seem like that's the case now. And I believe, the practice window, did it open? I forget if it opened on the Rams week or week 5. If whatever that is determines when he can return back.
It opened the week of the Rams game. That was when he...
Yeah, so next week will then likely be the last week because you get 3 weeks after that practice window opens to be elevated to the active roster. So he will likely be off of PUP next week, regardless if he is active or inactive in the game. Likely gets out of to the active roster for the Emmanuel Mosley roster spot that is going to be taken up when Mosley eventually gets placed on IR.
Yeah, so that'll be something that's going to be important. And in the meantime, they have, again, this is a team that has a lot of depth. We've been talking about that a lot over the offseason. And, losing Mosley is a blow, but they have Ambry Thomas, who started for them last year down the stretch. They have Dante Johnson, who started for them at cornerback against the Packers in the playoff game at Lambeau. And they also have Spencer Womack, the rookie that they just picked up out of Toledo that started the season as their starting nickel corner, who I think the team actually had originally envisioned as being an outside corner anyway. So they have some guys that they can fill in there that I think they'll be able to pick up the slack.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking about picking up the slack, what's your anticipation on who starts on the outside and at nickelback if there is a change there for this weekend?
I think it's going to be one of the 3 that I just mentioned on the outside. I don't see them I don't see them switching Diamond or Lenore. He's been starting to really kind of find his own in that spot. So I'd rather see him continue to thrive at that spot where he's starting to grow. And then I could see them going with Samuel Womack on the outside over the other two, just because, again, Womack is somebody who they drafted with the expectation he was going to be an outside corner. And he's already made some starts and played, I think, a little bit at the end of the Carolina game. So I would think it's going to be Womack, and then you will see. I think Johnson will get elevated to the active roster, though.
I think Johnson getting elevated to the active roster for the first time this year. I think that's a fair statement to make. For me, I personally actually believe the opposite, just based on what we saw at the end of last week. When you talk about Deommodore Lenoir, the 49ers do have confidence in him playing at both positions, obviously last year on the outside, this year more so in the slot. But at the end of last game, when Emmanuel Moseley was out, you did see Deommodore Lenoir shift to the outside, Womack to the inside. I'll be interested to see if they interchange the two, given Womack's ability, obviously, to play on the outside. He played that at Toledo, might have a little more comfortability in that role, and obviously his long arms make up for his bit of a slighter frame at that 5'10", 187-pound frame. And so I could see it either way, and I think Dante Johnson as well would be a key reserve if he comes in and plays in this game.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about here, too, is that if it, as Lenoir, he might be the starter. And part of the reason that he might be the guy that they go with, maybe they do take him and put him back on the outside. Just kind of thinking this through. And the reason is because the Falcons like to run 21 personnel so much. They want to run the ball. So they're so run heavy that you might not need to necessarily play a nickel all that often. So maybe we'll see. We'll know the answer before the game starts when they come out for warmups. That's when we're going to know. We'll kind of get an idea of what's happening here.
Yeah. Real quick, got to give a shout out to Jerome Davis and to the Notorious GAV always for popping in. Thank you guys. And Moonman here, he himself gives his prediction that Lenoir will start, but Notorious GAV here says whoever needs to start needs to step up big because they're going to get targeted more with Charvarius Ward, obviously in lockdown. And when you talk about it, I think that's a sentiment that we've seen so far, especially in this past week. Both of the outside corners so far have been fairly locked down. I think it's a you can make that argument. Charvarius Ward obviously had the 4 PBUs this past week. Moseley only gave up 1 catch on 4 targets on a slant route this past week. And so where have quarterbacks looked to target? That slot position. You look back to week 3, Cortland Sutton had a good amount of his 97 yards in the slot. And then last week, Deommodore Lenoir was targeted pretty heavily out of the slot, be it via Shai Smith, DJ Moore, whoever operated out of the slot. And I think that now it's going to be the biggest challenge thus far for the 49ers, because not only are teams going to try and target that slot position, they're going to target that outside position as well. In a way, it opens up another half of the field because the 49ers normally don't have traveling cornerbacks, or, I mean, even if they do, you're going to have 2 different targets, right? And so it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, the Falcons don't have the strongest receiver core. You got Drake London there. You got Kyle Pitts at the tight end, sometimes flexes out to the slot. It depends on who they're going to rely on. But yeah, I think that it kind of is going to be a challenge for the 49ers because of no Emmanuel Moseley, obviously.
Yeah, it's gonna be a challenge. It's gonna put a little bit of more stress on D'Amico Ryans to figure it out, But again, we went into the season talking about the depth of this team, and if you believed in the depth in August, then you need to know and feel good. I think you should feel good about the depth going into Atlanta and beyond without Moseley.
Yeah, and I think you gotta do that as well, right? When you talk about the way that the 49ers have created this roster, not only at cornerback, but at different positions, they've in a way insulated themselves for these type of injuries. Jason Verrett was brought back for this sole purpose. If an injury unfortunately happened, which they have with the 49ers and their defensive backs. Remember last year, Darquez Dennard playing in week 18 in the slot because of injuries and different things, right? It's just a norm with the 49ers. And so you had that not elite level depth, but a guy who has played very solidly for you just 2 years before coming in. And then obviously they insulated the linebacker position where Aziz Al-Shire is currently injured. You've got guys who can play that role, not as effectively, obviously, but you can play that role. And I think you can say that about several different positions for the 49ers this year.
You can, and I think you just hit on something that's going to be a key to watching this game, is if with the way that Atlanta comes into this thing, the 49ers are going to have 3 linebackers on the field a lot more than they usually do. So we haven't really seen much of that third linebacker having to be on the field. We know who Fred Warner is. We know who Dre Greenlaw is. Oren Burks is a guy who's, he's made starts in Green Bay. He's done okay. Maybe Atlanta decides to come out and they want to attack him, and maybe that's their target, is to go after him in the run game, and also try to ISO him up in the pass game every once in a while as well.
Yeah, I think so too. I was talking actually with Rich Madrid on Twitter because I tweeted out yesterday that just in general, when I was writing an article, that I honestly believe 49ers might let Aziz Al-Shire walk this offseason, but that spiraled into a conversation about Oren Burks. And the 49ers played in nickel all of week 3. Then in week 4, they weren't really as reliant on that third linebacker until, in a way, garbage time. Burks played 19 defensive snaps. But like you said, the Falcons like to run the football. They average, I think, over 5 yards a carry on significant volume this year. And I understand Cordero Patterson, one of the more efficient runners this year, is out. But really, their other running backs haven't been slouches either. Tyler Algier has averaged around 4.7 yards per carry. And overall, that unit has still been strong, especially with Marcus Mariota and his rushing threat as well. You might see more base personnel from the 49ers as a response to try and limit that Atlanta rushing game with the way that they utilize their offense.
Yeah, I think you'll see them still be going after the run. They ran the ball 31 times last week against Tampa Bay. And that was even though they were down by 21 in that game, I think at one point, they still finished that game at 31. And that some of those runs aren't called runs, maybe because Mariota is getting credited with runs that might have been on a scramble, but just looking at the stats of the game and how that went down, they're still averaging, over 30 carries a game. So I think you look at this one and you got to bring your big boy shoulder pads for this one if you're the 49ers.
Yeah. And the one thing that they have done well thus far, albeit with a healthier team, has been defending the run well. They're the number 1 run defense in the NFL currently. But no Ark Armstead for the third straight week now in a way. He played only 41% of the snaps against Los Angeles. No Javon Kinlaw for the third straight week. Both of them, they could be even out next week, Kyle Shanahan said. And so you don't have either of those 2 players. And so it's going to be Kevin Givens, Hassan Ridgeway, a mixture of Kerry Hyder, Charles Omenihu, all in that kind of defensive tackle range to try and stop this run. We're fairly efficient last week. Did a pretty good job against the run, obviously, against the Carolina Panthers. Allowed just 3.9 yards per carry. Carolina shifted away from the run, only had 14 carries. But in my opinion, that run offense was extremely predictable. I don't know why. That Carolina offense it's very interesting. First of all, they don't have their offensive linemen go out into the second level and block linebackers. Linebackers had free lanes all game long to defend in the run. And second of all, it was somewhat predictable when they were calling the run plays based on the alignment of their running back. Atlanta does not have either of those 2 things, and arguably has a better offensive line than Carolina as well. And so it's going to be a tougher matchup than last week, not only because of the personnel that Atlanta has, but also because of the depleted roster that San Francisco has with their front 4.
Yeah, it's going to be a real challenge for the 49ers this week against this running game. I look at this, the way that I look at this matchup is this matchup I don't think favors the 49ers nearly as much as a lot of people want to think it does. To me, I look at this matchup and it reminds me a lot of week 1 against Chicago and a lot of week 3 against Denver. Neither quarterback really playing all that well, but 2 teams that run the ball a lot. And I don't think it's a surprise that the 2 teams that ran the ball the most against the 49ers, the Broncos and the Bears, are the 2 teams that beat the 49ers. I understand the yards per attempt in both those games for the Bears and the Broncos was low. But when you watch the Bronco game in particular, because that's the one that's most recent in our memory bank, you saw a team that got shut down in the run throughout the early part of the game. But the Broncos in particular are able to continue to just keep hitting it. And what you saw is the fourth quarter came around, You saw the stuffs become gains of 2 and 3 and 4. It wasn't anything necessarily big, but they were just repetitive blows. And then the quarterback doesn't have to make a big play on third down, or maybe your quarterback that can move around like Justin Fields or Russell Wilson can take advantage of a little bit of a breakdown, scramble for a first down of their own, find an open receiver, those kind of things, because they're moving around. And Marcus Mariota is very similar to those two. And I think this matchup for the 49ers defense is going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree. And because you were talking about how close this game could potentially be in comparison to people's expectations, you tweeted something earlier today, and I want to kind of touch on that. You tweeted that Nick Bosa should play against the Atlanta Falcons if he's healthy. Tell me, just go through the thought process behind that, because I have my own thoughts on that, and I don't necessarily disagree with yours, but I want you to kind of go through the thought process of why you believe that and why it's important that he might need to suit up for the 49ers.
Well, I look at this as I understand the Falcons are 2-3. And the thought process, I think, for a lot of people is they're 2-3. This isn't a very good team. Look how bad they were last year, all those types of things. And I think people are failing to realize the Falcons have scored more points than the 49ers have this year.
Mm-hmm.
Their offense has actually put up more points than the 49ers. And they have been held under 20 points only once. That was last week, was the first time they've been held under 20 points all season. I think you need to play your best guys. If Nick Bosa is not there, Nick Bosa is one of your best guys. And Nick Bosa isn't just a pass rusher. Nick Bosa is one of the better defensive ends against the run. So by not having him out there, it weakens you. And I understand the thought process of we need to get him ready for the Kansas City game. Well, in reality, the bigger of those two games is this week against Atlanta.
Because it's the better chance for you to win.
Well, that's one thing. But the bigger thing is that Atlanta is in your conference. Conference wins is a big portion of the tiebreakers later in the year. You need to win your division games. You need to win your conference games. Losing your inter-conference games isn't that big of a deal. So if the 49ers are 4-3 after next week, but they beat the Bears and they lost to the Chiefs, I'd rather have that than be 4-3 because you lost to the Falcons and beat the Chiefs. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. And when you talk about Nick Bosa, here's what I'll say. Everybody talks about Nick Bosa and really how the 49ers defense has been elite. And it has been. Don't get me wrong, especially the defensive line. Charles Omenihu, Samson Ebukam posting pressure rates of above 20%. But if we're being honest, one of the reasons that they post pressure rates that high is also because of the way the 49ers use Nick Bosa. He attracts double teams. Defensive tackles attract double teams, leading to one-on-one opportunities for both, especially Ebukam off the edge or maybe Omenihu up the middle. Without Nick Bosa in the picture, the Atlanta Falcons offense can now adjust. You have Charles Omenihu, Samson Ebukam, maybe Kevin Givens and Hassan Ridgeway. That double team can now be applied to Charles Omenihu, who has a 25% pressure rate thus far, a 24% pressure rate thus far. That neutralizes one of your top targets. And something that I saw when I watched the tape, when Nick Bosa was out in the second half, the defensive line still ate, but they ate in a different way. It was more stunts and more linebacker and safety blitzes that I saw from D'Amico Ryans. You see, I think when you look at the sack numbers, Oren Burks had a sack, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles had a sack, and then Talanoa Hufanga had a sack later on. It was different ways that the 49ers created sacks. And then one of them was on an elongated sack because I think Omenihu got there first. That was like the one legitimate sack that I saw from the defensive line. Omenihu got there first. Jackson finished it off. It was a little tougher for the 49ers to create pressure without Nick Bosa in that game. And that was also, it was also with the mid-game adjustment. Obviously, you have more time. I think that he is such a vital part, not only in the run, but not only in the passing game, but in the running game. And the one thing that you talked about, him being one of the better run defending edge rushers, we didn't see that tested last week because the Panthers are so far down, they had to throw the ball a significant amount. And then you talk about the two factors I said earlier about how they were predictable and how it was easier to stop the run. That might be tougher this week, which is why those challenges might arise. And I'm not saying the 49ers are going to lose this game if they don't play Nick Bosa. I still think that they are favored, and I think they should win this matchup, but you do play your best players. And this kind of leads to my point. I don't know if I agree that Nick Bosa should play, because I don't want, is at least if there is a chance of re-aggravation, I don't think that that's worth the risk, because he is such a vital piece. And you've seen different players like Javon Kinlaw re-aggravate an injury and now miss multiple weeks. But if Nick Bosa believes he's healthy and the training staff believes he's healthy, I don't think it's up for discussion. I think Nick Bosa is going to play himself. He's a competitor. He's not going to want to sit himself. He's going to play.
Yeah, and I think that last part you hit on is kind of what I'm getting at. When I say he's healthy, it doesn't mean just that Nick Bosa can go out there and play. It means that he's as close to 100% as he's going to get. Because once you start the season, nobody's ever at 100% again until the season's over with. But if he is not at risk of injuring himself any more than he would be in any other game, then you go ahead and you let him play. So that's when I'm saying healthy, it's not just, hey, can he go out there and play? It's, can he go out there and do all the things you expect him to do and play at full speed and not risk injuring himself any more than he would have, in week 2 or 3, that kind of thing. And so if that's where he is, you play him. You don't hold him back just because you're playing the Falcons and you should be able to beat the Falcons and you got a big game coming up next week, because that's how you lose games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we've seen it where teams overthink it, right? Move to the next game and then lose that trap game, or so as people call it. We've seen the 49ers lose trap games. This exact Atlanta Falcons team, well, not exact, but this Atlanta Falcons team back in 2019. Remember when the 49ers game for them too? It was a 4-9 Atlanta Falcons team against one of the better 49ers teams, and they lost at the goal line because Julio Jones scored a touchdown. In a way, that's a game that it's not like they couldn't afford to lose, but that's a game they should not have lost, and they lost. These happen, and I think this year, especially in the NFL, has proven that good teams can lose to bad teams. And it's not bad teams, but good teams can lose. I don't think any team is invincible this year, at least in the NFC.
No, I agree with you. And you look at this, and again, the Falcons have been competitive in every game. I understand that they got down quite a bit against the Rams, and they got down quite a bit against the Buccaneers before making those games close to the end. But these guys are going to fight until the end of the game. And if the 49ers offense struggles, which I have a feeling they might, just because this is week 3 now of having a couple of good outings from the quarterback, I think this week's going to be a little bit tougher, because that's the way that history tells us it's going to be. You're going to need your defense to play a good game. And if Nick Bosa can play, you let him play.
Yeah. And before we move on, let's get to a couple of questions real quick. Luke is here asking, do you guys see the 49ers needing to trade for a cornerback? They've got a lot of draft capital. What do you think on this, Jack?
That depends on who's out there, who's available. You're not going to – if there's somebody that's out there that's better than what they have on their roster already, or they're going to be able to sign up in free agency, I don't know. We've seen them be pretty successful with Dante Johnson and Ambry Thomas on the field, and so I get it. Maybe if somebody's out there, again, I don't know who the targets are. You have to give me a target. If you're going to say, do they go for player X, and player X is pretty good, I might agree with you. Kind of, this is the tough one. Like, I was talking with Jesse about this the other night on Tuesday night. It was like, who are some of the guys that should the Niners make a move, kind of go all in? And it's, but you've got to make sure you're at the right spot, and you've got to make sure that you're not hamstringing yourself for the long term. And that's like they did with Sanders, Emmanuel Sanders, back in 2019. They did that right towards the end of the trade deadline, and they got a guy at a need who, at a position that wasn't like the biggest need, but he definitely filled a void for them.
Yeah, most definitely. I think at the moment I would say no, but it also completely depends on the player. If it is a player that you believe can elevate your floor and your ceiling, I think you do it, because the 49ers obviously can. You're getting better, right, at that position. Yeah. If you believe that capital is expendable, you do it if you're the 49ers. But it depends on the player. Depends on the familiarity with the scheme coming that they're coming in midseason, and it also depends on several other factors, such as, will the player come back with the 49ers? What's their role after that? But one move that I could see the 49ers doing that doesn't require a trade is bringing back Darqueze Dennard. it's clear the 49ers it's clear the 49ers have shown like not an interest, but they've shown that they believe he's capable of running their scheme. He came in 1.5 weeks and he played 18 snaps in that week 18 game, that crucial game. They have trust in Darqueze Dennard. He hasn't been signed yet. He obviously I think he's got a good grasp with the coaching staff. I think he would be a guy who you could plug in at the slot. He even has outside experience as well. He could be a guy that you could plug in if you wanted to move one of those slot guys to the outside. But at the moment, like I said earlier, their insurance policy is currently on the roster, and that's Jason Verrett. I think that you got to go with Jason Verrett right now. And when you talk about trading for a corner, it's not that likely that a top end corner is on the market. It's more so replacement level to fringe starting cornerbacks. And at that point, I think the 49ers are going to trust what they've already drafted and trying to develop right now. You've drafted a 3rd round cornerback, you've drafted a 5th round cornerback, and then another 5th round cornerback. That's 3 draft picks you've already tied into that position group. You've made several investments. It's not that those investments haven't panned out, but you have to develop those investments. And if you're getting similar level players, I don't understand expending or trading another draft pick while if you've already utilized those draft picks on those players. And it's not like those players have played bad, right? Deommodore Lenoir has stepped up at moments. Samuel Womack looked good in the preseason. Ambry Thomas obviously has had his fair share of issues, but you have players there that can step in while also having your insurance policy still on the roster.
Absolutely. I think you said it great. You kind of laid it all out. Those are all kind of the things that I'm feeling in mind. And I would just say, unless you're getting better, you don't make that move. And I also agree with you in that the 49ers and the way that they're built and the way they do business, they probably stick with what they have because they feel pretty comfortable, I think, with the cornerbacks that they have on the roster. And I agree with you on the Jason Verrett piece as well. He was the insurance guy for Emmanuel Moseley and for Travaris Ward, 2 guys who have had injury issues over the last couple of years.
Correct.
And if he can come back and he's healthy, he is the guy that was the reason that they brought him back and the role they envisioned for him.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Notorious GV asking here, should we be worried about Kyle Pitts? Kyle Pitts currently is questionable. I'd assume the 49ers have game planned all week as if Kyle Pitts is playing, but he's been an intriguing storyline this year. Has been used a little more as an inline blocker, similar in a way to George Kittle, used a little more as an inline blocker, and his impact has been a little mitigated this season after a strong rookie year. What are your thoughts on Kyle Pitts and how the 49ers should prepare for him?
Yeah, that he has some really strong abilities. That's why there were people talking about him being a target for the 49ers at 3. He was taken right after them by I think it was at 4, right? By Atlanta. I think Atlanta was sitting there at 4, and that's where they went with. He's a guy who I remember seeing somebody say during preseason that he was going to be a future Hall of Famer. The numbers and the play hasn't shown that yet, but the 49ers they should be worried about Kyle Pitts because he is somebody that could cause them a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think so too. I think especially over the middle, right? When you talk about those base packages, Atlanta is likely going to try and scheme Kyle Pitts on Dre Greenlaw, on Oren Burks, on one of those linebackers, right? Probably not Fred Warner as much, but either that or they're going to try and place him, if that doesn't work, in the slot against a slot cornerback. Demo Lenoir, Samuel Womack, both of them smaller than Kyle Pitts. Both of them, well, Womack might match his speed, but usually both of them slower than Kyle Pitts. So you got the athletic matchup there. And while obviously the 49ers would have safety help, you try and create favorable matchups. I think he's a guy who you got to definitely account for in that game plan, regardless of how he's performed or regardless of how they've used him this up to date.
Well, and that's the interesting piece because I see people talking about, I've seen things where people have kind of animated like, the Falcons have done a really good job of limiting Kyle Pitts and those kind of things. It sounds a lot to me like those conversations sound a lot to me like the George Kittle conversation from 2 weeks ago. You got to remember, Kyle Pitts has been targeted the second most of any receiver or any member of the Atlanta Falcons. So he's getting the ball thrown his way, 5 times a game. They also run the ball more than almost, they're one of the higher running teams. So their passing game is limited. And so just because he's not putting up the big numbers doesn't mean that he's not being successful when the ball does come to him. Although I will say he hasn't been because he's only got 10 catches on 22 targets. And I think that says a little bit about him. But when he does catch the ball, he's averaging over 15 yards a catch. And those are the things that you expected of him. It's just, I think Pitts isn't quite as good as people were expecting him to be, but he has that ability. And it's just a matter of, can he put it all together? And if he does, and you're not ready for him, he's going to burn you.
Yeah. There's an interesting question here that I actually want to talk about. It's flipping the boat a little bit. A lot of people are talking about the 49ers and different teams in the NFL acquiring an offensive lineman at the trade deadline. What are your thoughts on that topic? And do you believe that's realistic?
About the 49ers needing, would you say the 49ers getting an offensive lineman?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, has the 49ers offensive line been an issue at all? I mean,
not in my opinion. I think it's been one of the strengths of the team so far, despite spotty play potentially from your center, Jake Brindle, and maybe even your right guard, Spencer Burford.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at this offensive line, I mean, I think Spencer Burford's been a little bit struggle a little bit more than the other guys. I think Brendel at times as well, but I think it's pretty much been those two. McGlinchey's been who you expect for the most part. Trent Williams, before he got hurt, was pretty much what you expect. I mean, if you want them to go out and trade for an offensive lineman, you need to realize they'd be trading for a backup. I don't think that's something that the 49ers do.
And when you talk about offensive linemen with the 49ers, one thing that the 49ers have shown recently is it takes a while to be an offensive lineman for the 49ers. They don't normally plug rookies in, which was why many people were not confused, but shocked that Spencer Burford earned the starting job, right? You saw Aaron Banks last year. It's not like he was put in purgatory or anything, but you had a starter in Laken Tomlinson there. He didn't really win that job at right guard. It takes a while because of the complexity of the system. And also when you talk about offensive linemen on the market, it's not that normal for an offensive lineman, at least a premier offensive lineman, a starting caliber offensive lineman, to be available at the trade deadline. Why? Because teams try, even if you're a rebuilding team, teams try and build their core through the trenches, through the offensive line. And regardless of if you're rebuilding or not, if you are trying to get back up there, it's normally that you have a young quarterback. You're going to want to protect him with a good offensive line. So to me, normally the only times that teams do invest in offensive linemen and try and make a move for them is either in free agency or maybe in the offseason or in the draft. I don't really think it's that realistic to trade for an offensive lineman during the trade deadline. And in a way, when I talked about the insurance policy with Jason Verrett, I think the 49ers have their insurance policy, maybe even two insurance policies on this offensive line. That's the guy that people don't really know about, Blake Hance, and Daniel Brunskill, the guy who's played at all five positions for the 49ers on offense. Yeah, he's had his fair share of injuries, but Hance and Brunskill, in my opinion, are both versatile, could both plug in at certain positions. And you've already heard, Daniel Brunskill's already being inserted into the rotation at right guard. He could play center as well. That's what he played in the offseason. And so, you have your insurance policies there. So what would you be trading for? An eighth offensive lineman? I don't know if that's really worth it right now.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what you're hitting on the nail on the head there, and that you've got, right now they're down to they're on to their fourth tackle, playing left tackle, right? McGlinchey's been healthy, but it was Williams. Those are your top two, and then they went to the third guy, which was McKivitz, and now they're on to their fourth guy, which is Jalen Moore, and you played pretty decent with him. And behind him you have Hance, and Hance is a guy who started 8 games last year for the Browns and played fairly decent. He was okay. Again, this is a really deep team, and maybe they could spend some draft capital on that. But again, I just don't see it coming to the offensive line. If you're going to spend it, it's going to be on the defensive side. I think maybe defensive line would be a spot where you might see a trade, but just because of the injuries that they've had to Eric Armstead and Javon Kinlaw, and how long those two are going to be out. Maybe they decide that they want to bring in a guy who's going to be able to be towards the end of the bench, or maybe even a little bit more of an impact guy. But I just don't see them. maybe I just feel too good about the roster, and they just need to lose
I
another
think that
game for
that's
me to
I
agree with
think
you
that
guys.
that's a fair point. Yeah, and especially like I think the one area where you might look for a trade is the defensive line. You've seen it over the past couple of seasons. Charles Omenihu was a midseason acquisition last year, and the 49ers had a pretty strong defensive line even at that time because he had an extra year of team control. You might see a very similar move with the defensive lineman like that, a guy who's been used as a situational player who can come in and essentially replace another player next year once they hit free agency. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. Obviously, that talk is for a little bit down the road when the trade deadline is closer. But going back to the topic of the 49ers and the Falcons, talked about it defensively, how the 49ers or how the Falcons match up, how the 49ers match up. Let's look at the other side of the ball now. On the offensive side, 49ers had a pretty good performance obviously this past week. Garoppolo had one of his better performances in a while. Which is it's been interesting because you saw one of the worst performances that Garoppolo had against Denver. And then now you're seeing one of the better performances that Garoppolo's had in this game. What did you take away from that performance, really, from your perspective?
I feel like you're talking specifically about Garoppolo
Garoppolo,
or
but more so the
offense overall.
offense as well.
Hey, I felt like that performance was in line with what we've seen from them pretty much all year. They only had 10 points in the first half. In the second half, they scored 20, but of that 20, 7 of it was because of getting the ball back on the 4-yard line. So it was a 4-yard touchdown drive. But they've played well over the course of other than the Denver game. I think the offense has played okay, but they just continually shoot themselves in the foot with one thing or another and keep themselves from being able to score more points. I think special teams has been an issue for them. They had another blocked field goal last week. I think they're okay. I know a lot of the discussion this week has been that question you just said, has this offense found itself? Is Jimmy Garoppolo back? All those kind of things. And I say, let's give it one more week before we jump on that train and be like, this team is ready to go.
Most definitely. I think that you just hit it with that last point. Let's give it one more week. Why? In Jimmy Garoppolo's 5-year tenure with the 49ers, I don't think the issue has been the inability to make plays. He's shown that he can make these certain plays. He's made certain throws in his career, and so I'm not going to take that away from him. Issue with Garoppolo hasn't been that. I mean, I'm not going to say he can do everything. He is limited as a quarterback, but he's shown the ability to make certain throws. The only issue with it is, has he shown the ability to make those throws consistently? That's been a question that has yet to be answered. I said this earlier in the week, but the real statistic that really just it symbolizes the Jimmy Garoppolo era is this interception statistic. He hasn't gone 3 games in his career without throwing an interception. And to me, that's the epitome of inconsistency. And yeah, it's one meaningless stat, but to me, what the issue has been with the 49ers and Jimmy Garoppolo has you haven't been consistent on a week-to-week basis. So I agree with you. I think you have to wait one more week and really over the course of the season to see, can this 49ers offense really recapture the performance that they had this past week and continue to do it, because it's not only on Jimmy Garoppolo. It's, can the offensive line work in semblance with the running game and the passing attack? Can Jimmy Garoppolo execute? Can receivers not drop footballs, because that happened a couple of times this week? And overall, can Kyle Shanahan express confidence in his offense to create a consistent play calling or to create a consistent game plan and play call well enough for the 49ers to continue to win? All those factors need to hit. And really, everything has to be consistent for the 49ers to truly hit their potential. Last week was a good sign because offensively, even without Trey Lance at the helm, who was supposed to be that name of potential, even without Trey Lance at the helm, this 49ers offense is still dangerous when it reaches that potential. The only thing is, the only way it's going to reach its potential is if it can be consistent, and that question is yet to be answered.
Yeah, and yes, and it's been unanswered. And I'd be going into the game. I had talked about the 49ers running game, in particular, was one area, because since with Trey Lance at the helm, they were averaging about 5.7 yards per carry, and it was just, even if you take out the 50-yard 1-yard run by Deebo Samuel in that first quarter against the Seattle, they were still averaging 4.7. with Jimmy Garoppolo heading into Carolina last week, the offense had been averaging 3.5 yards per attempt. That's a big difference. And last week they were able to get to 5.3. And one of the things I liked about the performance from the run game perspective is they were consistent. It was obviously you had the 41-yard run, the big 41-yard gash by Jeff Wilson Jr. But but on top of that, he had a lot of other big runs throughout the game. It wasn't like he finished the game 17 carries for 65 yards, which is how he had been kind of playing. It was a big game, 17 carries. I think he was around 100 yards or 80 yards or whatever it was. 120. So, he even after the 40, the next 16 still went for 80. So that kind of a performance is what you need. Now, I understand too, the Panthers were playing without their starting linebacker, who was their leading tackler. They were playing without a starting safety, who was their second leading tackler. And then they were starting with their other starting safety. So both starting safeties gone, your best middle linebacker gone. That's going to help you do some things on offense, and especially as the game wears on, which we saw. This 49ers offense needs to show that they can do that again this week against Atlanta, or I jump on board with it. And it's the same thing with Jimmy Garoppolo. You mentioned it. Garoppolo has never made it through 3 weeks without a pick. And I've talked a lot about the growth, or I've mentioned, showed it. The interception percentage being at 0.93 is the lowest he's ever had, far below where his average has been since he started with the 49ers. If he can stay that way for a couple weeks and it continues on and he can make this through, like, say, week 3, 4 in a row, then you know that you're onto something. We're not there yet.
Yeah, I think that's all good points when you talk about Jimmy Garoppolo and in general, because when you look at you're not there yet, specifically with the running game. Yeah, you're right. The running game did take a serious hit when Trey Lance was out, because the running game with Trey Lance, it was 11-on-11 football. Now that drops to 10-on-11 football without Jimmy Garoppolo. And as a result, Kyle Shanahan needed to change the way that he was calling plays, but add a little more of creativity. You saw it first in the Rams game with that 41-yard or 38-yard Jeff Wilson touchdown. That was a really creative play, obviously, where you're faking it with the toss, that Zorro play that they always run, and cutting it back inside. You've seen similar iterations of that play call now be used in the last couple of weeks, have gotten you those 8-9-yard carries. And yeah, the 49ers are going to have these 1, 2, 3-yard carries, these minimal yard carries. That's just bound to happen because of how not hard, but the execution doesn't always work with 5 offensive linemen having to be lock and step. But with the potential of having these 8-9-yard carries on a consistent basis while playing 10-on-11 football, I think that if that can continue to be consistent, then the 49ers will have a dynamic rushing attack that should only improve when they increase the amount of options that they have, be it Elijah Mitchell to add to Jeff Wilson Jr., and now Tyrion Davis-Price coming back to operate that inside zone run.
Yep, with you.
We talked about the running game. Let's talk about the passing game this past week. Obviously, George Kittle was featured a little more. His highest receiving total, I think he had 43 total yards in this game. Not too high, but still a higher receiving total. Did you think that there was anything different in the way the 49ers utilized George Kittle? Obviously, seeing a good amount of carries early. And how did you like the performance there?
Well, I think with Kittle, it was you could see that there was a plan to get him the ball early and often. They opened up the game with it. They came back to it a little bit. Like opened the game up with it. They came back to it, I think, on the next series when basically a play very similar, is a little bit different design, but they got him play action, dropped it off to him. That's the play he fumbles on. They got him the shot down the left sideline, which helped them out. So there was definitely, I think, a want to use him a little bit more, get him involved in the game earlier. But overall, again, I don't see a big change from where they were against the Rams to where they were against the Carolina. Think about this for a second. Everybody was up in arms about the lack of targets for George Kittle against the Rams in that win on Monday night. He came back the following week and he had 2 more targets. 2. That's it. They threw the ball to him 2 more times and everybody was quiet. I mean, again, I think it's one of those things where you need to understand who you're watching. And the 49ers are one of the lower teams in the league in terms of throwing the ball. They don't throw it a lot. So you're going to have guys like George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel who are going to look underutilized because you don't throw the ball a lot. And who really cares when you're winning?
Yeah, I think you did hit it. It's only 2 more times, and really, if you look at the amount of times they utilized him, it dropped off after that first half, right after that first quarter, really, when they really targeted George Kittle. And to me, when I can understand why fans might be irritated. I think it might be more fantasy football focused, but in general, when you look back and watch the film, it's to me, I really, really enjoy the way that George Kittle plays. The
Yeah, well,
way that
you know,
he's utilized in the running game, he's
yeah.
such a he's just a damn good run blocker. You know, like yeah, we can utilize Charlie Warner, but the way that you need both tight ends to operate in this running game, he's just such a damn good run blocker, and it just works like when he's clicking and when he's out there on the field.
Yeah, you nailed it. It's the fantasy football fan mindset. Why is George Kittle not getting the ball more? He's my tight end. I need him to make plays. He's not getting the ball thrown enough, so I'm going to start yelling and screaming. And then you've got some other people that are helping to amplify it. And George Kittle is a very good tight end, maybe one of the best all around tight ends in the league. It doesn't mean that you need to throw him the ball 5-10 times a game. Throw him the ball, 4, 5, 6 times maybe. Your better playmakers are Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Obviously, I think that Kyle Juszczyk is a better target in a lot of ways than George Kittle. I want to see the ball go to him more often. So, overall, the George Kittle thing, I think you're on the right track. He's a damn good run blocker. He's a really good pass blocker too, and he helps this offense stay on the field, especially with a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, even more so than it would be with Trey Lance.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, people do get irritated, and then when you see George Kittle, when you see him in the passing game too, there are chances when he was open. More like I think we saw I when I was breaking down the Broncos game, there were a couple of routes where he was open. Some of those out routes Garoppolo didn't throw, and it's intriguing because Garoppolo throws like in this past game, he threw some tight window throws that hit to George Kittle, and then obviously George Kittle did fumble. That was an unfortunate play. I don't think it shakes any confidence or anything, but overall, I don't care really how many targets George Kittle gets on a regular basis if he's being utilized in the same way. It's up to his quarterback to get him those targets, but if he's being utilized in the same way, be it as a decoy or be it, to attract another defender, be it in the run game, the 49ers offense works with George Kittle having a role both in the run game and the passing game. If George Kittle only had a role in the passing game, this offense would not be as prolific as it is.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. I'm with you on that. And I need to start to think about what Sunil told me last night, though. I need to get a little more edgy. So let's get to the next topic. Maybe I can be a little more edgy with that one.
Okay, we'll get to let's get to a real interesting topic. Okay, actually, because I said real interesting topic, we're going to talk about special teams real quick. The Atlanta Falcons, Caleb Williams, he is one of their running backs, one of their newer running backs. He's played really well, but he also leads the NFL in punt yards per return, 15.4 punt yards per return. 49ers special teams looked like it was getting off to a pretty damn good start. Injuries started to pile. No Tarvarius Moore over the past couple of weeks, one of their top gunners. It's kind of dropped down a bit. Are you worried that facet might ruin the 49ers' chances in this game or drop it back down to make it an even closer game as it has in the past?
I definitely think that it could be something that causes this game to be a little bit closer than it should. And I think you hit on a good one right there with the Tarvarius Moore piece, with him being out. I think that might have had something to do with their kickoff coverage team in particular, showing some struggles the last couple of weeks. Getting him back might help that out. And yeah, special teams is a big part of the game. It's the third phase of the game, right? But it is important because it's field position and it can dictate points. The 49ers have lost some points this season with a couple of blocked field. I think they've had 2 field goals blocked, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
One of them taken the other way for a touchdown. And those are the things that in tight games like this one could swing in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, we've seen it time and time again last year. Both games against Seattle, special teams did have a big impact. This year,
Mhm.
Ray McLeod, he hasn't had the impact that I've expected him to have on special teams itself. I think it's been not a rough process, but it's been a little underwhelming when you look at the statistics about the amount of kickoff yards per return, the amount of punt yards return. Obviously, anything is an improvement over last year where the 49ers were near the bottom in special teams DVOA. But I think that the return of Tarvarius Moore, who has been, I think, healthy this week, fully hasn't even been on the injury report, should be an additional asset for the 49ers. And I think that they have to kind of clear up that way, because if you back them up, you're going to obviously change the way that they can approach their offense. And Mitch Wishnowsky, Robbie Gould, it seems like both are healthy. We'll see. Wishnowsky, in a way, has had a bit of a struggle kicking touchbacks. We'll see if that continues this week, because Wishnowsky likely will be the kickoff guy. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd assume he's probably going to be the kickoff guy, even though Gould is going to be healthy this week.
I'm not sure on that. I haven't heard in one direction or the other. I think that if Gold is healthy, they should probably just use him like they normally would if they're going to have him. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, but that's enough on special teams. To end the show today, we're going to talk about the spicy topics. Let's get Jack a little edgy. Deebo Samuel last week, 9 targets, only 2 receptions. He had 20 yards. It wasn't an inefficient performance between him, but like just him and Garoppolo not on the same page. Obviously, the missed touchdown opportunity before he actually got a touchdown, a drop by Deebo Samuel. He was playing against J.C. Horn last week. Pretty good coverage. This week, you're facing an even tougher opponent, and that's A.J. Terrell. Likely will line up against Deebo Samuel. Do you think that matchup will be one of importance in this week, or do you think the 49ers are going to use Deebo Samuel more as a decoy? How does his impact matter in this week?
Deebo Samuel always impacts it, whether he's getting the ball or not. So he's always going to impact it. But you want to try to get the ball into his hands. He's your best playmaker when he gets the ball into his hands. So I think you want to try to get him, even if it's just got to be off of a screen, or maybe it's something out of the backfield. Got to get the ball into his hands one way or another. So I would say that it's important to get the ball to Deebo Samuel.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask, would you like if he was used as a receiver out of the backfield a little more? It seemed like it worked in the initial weeks. Maybe defenses have figured a way out, but that in a way schemes him against a linebacker or against a safety unless the defense reacts accordingly. Do you think that should be a factor in this week as well?
I do think it should be a factor. You got to keep pushing them, and I think that's I agree with you. I do believe that is a big piece of the game.
Let's talk about the other receivers. Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings sat down for a podcast this week, but that's not important. Instead, Ayuk, last week's leading receiver, 3 catches, 58 yards. How do you like to see him getting involved in this game? Because, like I said, A.J. Terrell's on one side. You got Casey Hayward on the other side, another pretty solid corner. Last week, 2 solid corners. Dante Jackson was on Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk has been obviously a guy who many believe has been underutilized in this offense, primarily because Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't throw him the ball. Do you still want to see him, or how do you want to see his role this week?
For Brandon Ayuk?
Yeah.
I would like to see him maybe get a few more targets. I'd like to see, last week was really Deebo heavy in terms of the targets. I think he had the most at 9, which was was above everybody else. I'd like to see Ayuk get a couple more. Ayuk's an interesting one to me. I think there are some things where he meshes with Jimmy Garoppolo, and there's some that were in ways that he doesn't. And one of them is the deep ball. We know that he wants to get the ball deep, and Garoppolo doesn't throw the best deep ball. But at the same time, 2 of Garoppolo's better throws have been deep balls to the outside of Brandon Ayuk that he's been unable to come down with.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it's not an in-stride play, and he's having to spin around and make the catch, and he's having a hard time getting his eyes on the ball and tracking it. And I would like to be able to see him come out and maybe put up a little bit better performance this time around.
Yeah, I agree. And it is an interesting dynamic because Ayuk, in a way, some of his routes, a good amount of them, at least the ones that he probably believes he flourishes on more, are developing routes. And one issue with Jimmy Garoppolo, one of his flaws, has been that he bails on routes too early, tries to go for an easier, maybe a more conservative route. Brandon Ayuk hopefully will get a couple of more targets this week. Had 4 this week, only 4 last week against Los Angeles after having 8 the last 2 weeks. But it also depends on the way the 49ers utilize him. One thing I do want to see that we did see a little bit against Los Angeles, involve him more in the screen game. If it's a struggle getting him targets in that way, Ayuk was a dominant guy in the screen game in his rookie year 2 years ago. That was a role that the 49ers utilized him in. Obviously, Deebo Samuel has eclipsed that role as well. He being a great guy after the catch. Utilize him a little more in the screen game.
Absolutely. Get him the ball out in space. Let him work. That was one of the things that kind of the screen game that you're talking about this is something that was interesting to me about the way that the 49ers went into the Carolina game. We don't see them throw screens a lot to the backs. A lot of the time when they run screens, Correct. It's to the wide receivers.
Yeah.
They're not a great screening team. I think what happens is I don't think teams really pressure them as much, like get up the field after them, like really pinning their ears back. And so I think that kind of hurts them in their screen game at times. Carolina went after them, and the 49ers were able to take advantage of a Carolina defense that didn't have its starting middle linebacker in the game, and get through and get some nice screens. And so it'd be interesting to see if they can kind of make that roll as they move through the season.
Yeah, I think it is situational. It depends on how the defense plays you and how they're able to adjust. Obviously, with Jimmy Garoppolo at the helm, defense are normally a little more aggressive, daring him to throw the football, daring him to make those mistakes. Because if we're being honest, in his career, he has been turnover worthy, a turnover prone player. And so we'll see how Atlanta now changes. They, similar to Carolina, will not have their regular starting middle linebacker. Deion Jones was traded this past week, or I think it was this past week, to the Cleveland Browns in exchange for draft compensation. So they're going to have a change there as well. We'll see how they react. But who knows? The 49ers, I feel like it's a part of their system. But screens as well, they've got to do a good job of making them less predictable so that they are effective when they use them.
Absolutely. It'll be an interesting one to see how this one plays out. You said Deion Jones. That's who was that go?
Yeah, Deion Jones.
I'll check him out. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check him out a little more.
Last linebacker, receiver Juwan Jennings, 2 catches, 45 yards. Works. He's had a good couple of weeks now, working well after the catch. A 32-yard catch against the Carolina Panthers this past week. Had 22 yards the week before on 4 targets. Would you like to see an increase as well in targets for Juwan Jennings? And obviously, we keep in mind that with so many mouths to feed and the way that the 49ers pass the ball, it is tough to get people targets as well.
I like the way that they've utilized. He's kind of their third down chain mover, right? He's in a way, he's kind of, they utilize him more out of the slot, more on the inside. He runs really good routes from that area. And I would like to see them kind of just continue to utilize him in that role. I think it fits him really well. Both of his catches last week featured, terrific run after the catch plays from him. I felt like watching that game on Sunday and the way that he performed, it felt a lot like the season finale down in Los Angeles last year, where when they needed big plays, they went to 15, and then 15 made some plays with his feet, after the catch, and that felt like what we saw from him against Carolina. And I'd like to see. I don't necessarily think he needs a lot more touches, but let's go. Let's feed him the ball a little bit.
Yeah, get him the ball, and really all these targets coming together kind of lead to one last point. 49ers need to have a balanced game plan, I think, in this week. Why? There's one player on the opposite side. Grady Jarrett has been a dominant force this year. He's been really good. And so in a way to neutralize him, you got to have a dominant or a pretty good quick game, but also a balanced attack, because running up the middle, 2 words, Grady Jarrett, that's going to be tough. What do you think about him, and how do you think the 49ers should kind of combat his presence this week?
Grady Jarrett's a really good player, and we've the way that you get after him is you make him chase the ball around, and the way you do that is you run that stuff. You try to get to the edges, and you make him have to chase you. And the more you start to do that, then you're able to start using traps and those kind of things to let him get up the field. You trap him and you run in behind him. Those types of things. And the 49ers were successful doing that last year in the game at Levi Stadium. I think we'll see much of the same this time.
I agree. Last question of the day. Here it comes from Lucas. Stephon Gilmore could be available if the Colts lose more games. William Jackson, Steven Nelson, Tyson Campbell, CJ Henderson could be some names who are available. What are your thoughts on any of these options? Obviously, now some options on the table. Do you think that the 49ers, if available, should trade for these? Or are you a little more hesitant until you see how Jason Verrett comes back?
No, I mean, those are all really good names. My question is, how are the 49ers going to fit those guys in salary cap wise? Because they have right now about $5 million. They like to always give themselves a buffer of about $2 to $3 million. So really, they have about $3 million to spend on the roster right now. Are any of those guys that they're going to be able to bring in? Or I guess in order to pick them up, you're going to have the trade. So who are the Colts going to give you, or who are you going to give the Colts in order to get a player like Stephon Gilmore? Who is valuable enough that you're going to use to pick up Stephon Gilmore? And that's always the question, is like, these guys all make these names look really good, but who are you willing to give up from the 49ers that is really realistically going to allow that other team to be like, you know what, that's a move that I want to make? And so I would like to throw it back to you guys, is who are you giving up to get this player? Because if you're giving up, I don't really know. Like, think about it.
Is it going to be draft capital, or what is it going to be? Yeah.
And I don't think it can be draft capital, because they don't have enough money.
You're down a first round pick. Yeah. Oh, you're talking about the money wise. Yeah.
So you've got to give up the money. You've got to get up in order to absorb their contracts. I think they're going to have to do something in terms of their, by sending a player out. What player is another team going to want to take? And I know the 49ers have a lot of draft capital, but at the same time, that's capital that you use in the draft to move around the board.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the 49ers also, I think they are confident, like I said, in the pieces that they currently have. And it's a waiting game. The one thing that I do question about a trade, I don't think that the Jason Verrett experiment is going to be, you won't have a definitive answer until after the trade deadline. So I think the 49ers would stay pat, wait for that trade wait for Verrett to potentially go, and then maybe sign someone from free agency following, if for some reason Jason Verrett doesn't respond the way that they want and they need an extra player. Sure.
And real quick, I just want to take a look really quick at because the comment from Lucas was that the Colts could be in a rebuild sooner than later, and some picks could get it done. Gilmore isn't that expensive, so let me just take a look at it, because I don't know what Gilmore's contract looks like. It was
I know he signed a 2-year deal, but the first year cap hit is a little lower.
It was 2 years, $20 million total. The cap hit this year, 7.75, so not too bad. And then if you were to absorb him, it's $5.5 million in base salary. The 49ers don't have the salary cap space to absorb his contract, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. The 49ers have about $5.8 million in salary cap space right now. Unless they trade a player, they're not going to be able to fit that in under their cap and still have room to work, unless they either trade a player or just cut another player somewhere along the line that doesn't have dead cap. And then next year you would have to pay $11.9 million, 7.98, a little bit more than that, probably somewhere in the range of 9 when it's all said and done, because of the roster bonuses that he has. Do you want to have him come back next year when you're expecting to have, again, it's
a lot of different moving parts pretty much in this conversation when you already have moving parts on your own part.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. So I love the conversation. Yes, if I can pick up, if there is a way that the 49ers can get Stephon Gilmore and make him work within the salary cap, which you can always fudge things around. If you really like a player enough, you'll do that. Yes, go get Stephon Gilmore. He's better than anybody else that the 49ers have on the roster. So if you want Stephon Gilmore bad enough, go get him. So I'm not saying don't go get him, but it's just, when you look at it, it's going to be tough. And the 49ers, when they're looking at it, they may be doing a risk reward scenario. And just like we always do when we're going to go out and buy something, they're doing the same thing here for themselves. And do I want the 49ers to have Stephon Gilmore? Give me Stephon Gilmore. Give me Stephon Gilmore. I need Stephon Gilmore. No, I don't need him, but I would take him, is what I'm saying. I was trying to get excited for you guys.
The edgy version.
Yeah, Lucas, I'm not trying to poo-poo your idea. I get where you're going. And if you can get one of those guys, I wouldn't even call it a bad deal. I just don't know how you get there.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good point and a good way to end the show because obviously, trade deadline coming up soon. I think it is the week of week 8. That's going to be a very intriguing time. The 49ers might make a move. They made one for Charles Omenihu last year, obviously paid dividends not only last year and this year. If they make a move for a cornerback, we'll see what that deal is. Potentially, it could be Stephon Gilmore, and Lucas calls it. But that's all for another time. And Jack, obviously, I appreciate all your time always. All you guys in the chat, thank you guys so much for tuning in. A couple of things before we go. Be sure to subscribe to Jack's channel. Always has good content. And be sure to also follow or go ahead and read on the, 49ers.pressdemocrat.com, right? Or Santa Rosa.pressdemocrat.com or something like that.
Santa Rosa, if you want to go to the 49ers, Santa Rosa, it's a the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. Man, if I could speak, this would be so much easier. Hold on a second.
I can't either. That's why I passed it to you.
Yes, it's the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. But if you want to check out the 49er stuff that I write for over there, it's 49ers.pressdemocrat.com. That gives you the inside the 49ers blog over there. It's great content. You can in some ways it has a really cool as far as like the chat room over there. It gets a little lively especially during the games. I'm trying to do a better job of moderating that and talking with the folks over there instead of just doing it on Twitter. So if you want to get some information and you're not seeing me maybe on Twitter enough or giving you the answer on Twitter that you're looking for, jump over there, check out the articles, and then put a comment in there and I'll check it out.
Yeah. And for those of you guys that like my written content, be sure to check out 49ers WebZone. That's where I post my content. And that's really one of the places where I like to write my content. A lot of guys like it there. So be sure to check it out there. But thank you guys. Subscribe to both channels. Link is in the description. And we will see you guys next time.
Take care, everybody.